1968 was a groundbreaking year for horror cinema. Over in the US, George Romero was reinventing the American horror film with his indie grindhouse hit, Night of the Living Dead. Meanwhile, the big Hollywood studios were also tapping into the zeitgeist when they made Rosemary's Baby, a contemporary New York story starring an up-and-coming actress made by a hip new director. But over in the UK, Hammer were producing their own occult movie that same year called The Devil Rides Out. Unlike the more modern, trendy US offerings, this film, based on a Dennis Wheatley book and starring Christopher Lee, still firmly belonged in the old-fashioned Gothic tradition. Moving forward into the 1970s, this became a problem for Hammer. They slowly gained a reputation as being this somewhat stuffy uncle, unable to keep up with the new Hollywood offerings. This is exemplified in one of their later occult movies, another Dennis Wheatley adaptation called To the Devil, a Daughter.
In 1967, Rosemary's Baby. In 1974, The Exorcist. And now, a motion picture that probes further into the mysteries of the occult that any has dared before.
But it wasn't Rosemary's Baby or The Exorcist. To the Devil, a Daughter disappointed audiences and became a box office flop. And it was the final nail in the coffin for Hammer horror. However, 1968's The Devil Rides Out is now often cited as Hammer's greatest film, and its gothic sensibility means that it's remained a timeless occult classic. Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of the occult, and we discuss two Hammer classics, To the Devil, a Daughter and The Devil Rides Out.
When this ceremony has been performed, I shall destroy you, John Burney.
Welcome back to the Evolution of Horror. My name is Mike, and as ever, I am your host. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres, one series at a time. We're currently in the middle of our 5th season, exploring the evolution of the occult in horror cinema. This is part 8, in which, as the intro suggested, we're returning to the UK and to Hammer Studios. This week we're going to be covering two movies in spoilerific detail, both based on Dennis Wheatley novels, The Devil Rides Out in 1968 and To the Devil, a Daughter in 1976. Both of these discussions will be spoilerific. I would urge you guys to check out these movies before listening to the discussions, particularly The Devil Rides Out, because it really is a fantastic film. So I would recommend you go and seek it out before listening to our discussion. We will also mention a few other Hammer movies in passing, and we do discuss very briefly The Witches from 1966. However, that's not what I would call a deep dive spoilerific discussion, so don't feel like you have to have watched that before listening to the episode. Alright, we've got lots of ground to cover. Let's get straight into it. Joining me to discuss these two movies he's becoming my regular Hammer expert. He was here last series discussing the Hammer zombie film, Plague of the Zombies. So good to have him back. He is a professor, a scholar. In fact, he was my professor at university, and he knows everything there is to know about British horror cinema of this era. It is my great pleasure to welcome back to the podcast Graham Saunders. Hello, Graham.
Hello, Michael.
Hello. So here we are again. This time we're talking all things occult. Last time you were here, we talked about zombies, and I just wondered, what are your thoughts on this area of horror, on these types of movies? Are you a fan of occult movies?
Yeah, I think I prefer them more than zombie films.
I think most people do, actually, by the sounds of it. Yeah.
I think partly because of it's that period when you're growing up that during the sort of early 70s, the films that you really wanted to see at the cinema were The Exorcist and The Omen. I was too young to see that. And also on terrestrial television, The Devil Rides Out and Night of the Demon were available. Yeah. So they were amongst the first films I ever saw in the horror genre. So there's a sort of a nostalgic pleasure, but it's one which I know we're going to be discussing later about where things have gone now with the occult and satanic horror, and it's still very much with us. So it's the genre that keeps giving, and it's one which I think keeps evolving more than almost any other genre.
I agree, definitely. It's a very kind of amorphous term, occult, isn't it, really? Because actually the word occult, if you kind of look up the definition, which we've discussed, obviously it just kind of means hidden, and that's all it is. So it doesn't really necessarily mean that it has to be to do with devil worship or any of these other things, but it's become associated with that in film, hasn't it?
So all horror film could be called occult.
Exactly.
If you wanted to lump everything together. Yeah.
Agreed. And I think, we're finding actually with this area of horror that, of course, that's the thing. It does cross over, that we are dabbling in folk horror. We are dabbling even in ghost stories. We are dabbling even a little bit in the voodoo zombies that we talked about last time. There is a kind of crossover with all these areas, isn't
Our
there?
genres are going to get tangled. They're going to get tangled, and evolution is going to go down to some odd blind turns.
Exactly, absolutely. So, and I think maybe not so much now, but I think of all of the areas of horror, though, these ones had the reputation as being quite shocking. Is that a religious thing, do you think? Is that because basically we're coming at it from sort of quite old-fashioned Christian points of view?
Yeah, I think it's practical as well, because you've got censorship in the cinema. So, for example, with the Dennis Wheatley occult novels, I know we're going to be talking more about Dennis Wheatley later, but Hammer acquired the rights to most of his major occult novels, like The Devil, a Daughter, Lost Continent, The Haunting of Toby the Jug, in 1963. But they felt that they couldn't get those films past the censor. So it takes until 1968 that they actually make the first in the Wheatley cycle of 3 films that Hammer do.
Wow. So why do you think, what is it that changed in the 1960s, do you think, when because we did seem to suddenly get this sort of glut of sort of satanic panic type movies, didn't we, in that sort of late 60s time period?
Well, again, we've mentioned this in the zombie strand of evolution of horror, that 1968 is along with almost everything in theatre. In Britain, we've got the abolition of theatre censorship. We've got those key films, Night of the Living Dead, Rosemary's Baby, Witchfinder General, 68. You've got the Paris uprisings, the Manson murders in America. Now, of course, that impinges on Polanski and Sharon Tate, his wife, who's a victim of the Manson group.
And they were tied up in at least making their crimes look in some way occult and related and satanic as well, weren't they? So it all links. Yeah.
So there's, I certainly think there's that, and and this questioning of religion, and that idea of also an interest from the late 60s in paganism.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting.
In sort of looking at older religions like Wicca, mysticism. So investigating sort of what came before Christian religion.
Yes.
I think that sort of comes together with, although To the Devil, a Daughter is a really old novel. I mean, it's written in 1934.
Wow.
So in some respects, it is the granddaddy of both occult novels. Now, of course, the Victorians, M.R. James, sort of had an interest in the occult.
Definitely.
But Wheatley's novel is interesting. It's, as I say, the sort of granddaddy of the occult, and a lot of the sort of tropes of Satanism in cinema come from it. But again, if we're talking about evolution, that really stops after 1968. So suddenly there's an evolution of the occult film into something very, very different. The past, setting the occult in the past stops for a long time. We have to wait really until a film like The Witch.
Yes.
I think a seriously underrated
wonderful film. Yeah, wonderful.
So we're going back to the Salem witch trials.
Did most of these occult movies have to be quite black or white, i.e., God is good, the devil is bad? I mean, they seem to mostly sort of take that point of view, don't they?
It certainly is with Wheatley.
Yes.
That it is the forces of light versus the forces of darkness. So in a Wheatley novel, there is always someone on the side of the angels.
Yeah.
So the Duc de Richelieu in The Devil Rides Out, and Makata.
Yes.
And in the end, the forces of light win.
Yes.
by the time we get to Rosemary's Baby, it's Hail Satan, and and it seems as though this group of Satanists working in this brownstone set of apartments have triumphed. And of course, Wheatley himself was always in all of the prefaces to the novels. He puts this rather sanctimonious preface saying, "I warn you about dabbling in black magic. No good will come of it." And he's always keen to stress he's never actually attended a Sabbat, but he knows about these things.
So over in Britain, we had Hammer horror.
Yes.
By 1968, and we'll get to The Devil Rides Out in a minute. But would you say were we a bit behind the curve with kind of filmic and horror trends? Would you say?
I think Hammer were just starting to get behind the curve.
Right, yes.
That's, again, I'm repeating myself probably from the zombie strand, that 68 is interesting. They've had this huge success with 1 Million Years BC.
That's right, yes.
They are making some really interesting films from 66 to 68. They're making Quatermass and the Pit.
Yes.
Of course, Plague of the Zombies. They've had some flops. Another Wheatley novel, Lost Continent, has bombed.
Yes.
And they've done Devil Rides Out. So on the one hand, they're breaking into new ground. There hasn't really been a significant film since Night of the Demon and, as you say, Night of the Eagle, Burn Witch Burn.
Yes.
So they're into sort of new territory. But what happens is that Devil Rides Out doesn't do very well in the States. Hammer are very reliant on Warner Brothers, their distributors.
Right, yeah.
And they say to them, well, we want you to go back to the old stuff. Dracula, Frankenstein, The Mummy. So it represented an opportunity, I think, but it's one that wasn't taken. So what they do is they go back to films like Twins of Evil, Countess Dracula. Yes. Now, they do take account of the relaxation in censorship. So these films have got nudity, they've got gore, but they're essentially reworking the old films from the late 50s and the early 60s.
That's interesting.
So then you've got Dracula AD 1972, the Satanic Rites of Dracula.
Yes. It's almost like the rest of the world didn't want Hammer to... They wanted Hammer to stick with what they were good at, which was Gothic castles and vampires and that kind of thing.
But the audiences had moved on. And so in America, despite what Warner Brothers had said, suddenly Rosemary's Baby is a huge
super
hit.
Trendy, modern, very of its time, right? Isn't it? That's the thing. Same with Night of the Living Dead, of course. Yeah.
Yes, and of course it doesn't do that well when it comes out, but it starts to build an audience.
Yes,
through television and reruns.
Yes,
and also of course influencing lots of other directors.
So that's interesting. So that, and I know we did briefly cover this last time, but that kind of middle era of Hammer, like you said, where we had Plague of the Zombies and Devil Rides Out, is that your sort of favourite era? Of Hammer,
is. It's probably my favourite, but also I like the films that it makes in its decline as well.
Right. Yes.
Because I think there are gems. There are dark stars as Hammer burns. It's a bit like a sun.
Yes.
Burning out, but there are some really interesting moments where it's spewing out films like Vampire Circus, which I think are really interesting films, and some of its thrillers, Fear in the Dark, Straight On Till Morning. I think they're really interesting examples of the genre.
I've still got so many to get through. I've got my box set, and I've only watched about half of them so far. The one I really want to see is The Nanny. I haven't seen The Nanny.
The Nanny
yet.
is great fun.
Yeah, it looks fun. Yeah, I'm very excited to get through some of these. But actually, funny enough, the ones that I find myself reluctant to visit are the Dracula and Frankenstein ones. I like the separate kind of the ones that stand alone. It's really interesting.
And I think it's a law of diminishing. I mean, I suspect in other strands you're going to be looking at the vampire film. You're going to be looking at Frankenstein. But I certainly think by 60, the films they make in the Dracula series after Dracula Prince of Darkness in 65, it really is diminishing returns. You know, Dracula's Risen from the Grave in 68.
Yeah.
Scars of Dracula. I do like Dracula AD 1972 because it's written by there's a program that's just begun on British terrestrial television called The Circle, where there are people pretending to be other people, and there's a 40-something woman pretending to be a young urban hipster. And Dracula AD 72 is a bit like that. It's written by someone in their 70s trying to be, I mean, there's a great moment where the kids talk about going to a jazz spectacular, which is really, they're 30 years out. Yeah, so whoever's writing it is talking about trad jazz.
That's brilliant. Well, that's it. That sums it up, doesn't it? You know, going back to my question about, they're a little bit behind the times, aren't they?
Yes.
In a wonderful way, in a charming way.
Yes.
So let's talk about Dennis Wheatley before we get into these movies. Again, just for anyone out there listening who may not be aware of him, I'm sure people are very aware of some of the stuff he's written. But just briefly speaking, who was Dennis Wheatley?
Well, if you Google Dennis Wheatley and you go onto pictures, I urge you to do this now if you're listening to this live, you'll see a figure in a smoking jacket with a large glass of probably very good claret in his study. And this is Dennis Wheatley. He's someone who has, apart from the satanic novels, has largely disappeared from view. I went onto a very well-known book-selling site recently, and you can, for the princely sum, I think, for just over £100, obtain entire collection of his novels in embossed red leather. They still may be up there.
Wow.
He was incredibly prolific. At one point, he's selling more than Agatha Christie.
That's right.
He starts writing in 1932. His first novel is called Forbidden Territory. It's a huge hit. It goes through 7 reprints in 7 weeks. He's a million-seller author. I mean, he writes on every subject under the sun.
Right.
So he writes historical romances. He writes spy stories. He has a series of detective thrillers called the Molly Fountain novels.
That's
and To the Devil's a Daughter features this female sleuth who has worked in the War Office over the years, during the war years, as a secret agent.
Oh, interesting.
He even dabbles in science fiction. So he's incredibly prolific. He churns out, usually at best, a novel a year.
Yeah.
Sometimes more than that. So he's incredibly prolific, and he's hugely popular. Now, I urge anyone, if they're thinking about doing a PhD, Wheatley would be really interesting. He's almost as I say, his satanic novels are still in print, but it's very, very difficult to get hold of anything else. But at one point, I mean, my first introduction to him, my dad, before he got married, was a member of a book club, and I remember he had a lot of Dennis Wheatley novels. He really liked them, and that was my first exposure to Wheatley. Was not the films, but reading Strange Conflict, which was a fantastic novel set in the Caribbean about voodoo. And of course, to the devil rides out.
And interesting. You know, you mentioned spy novels. I read that Ian Fleming was actually influenced by Wheatley in terms of when he created James Bond, even. So,
and they knew each other. There was sort of that circle himself. People like Noel Coward, and also Wheatley was before he became a novelist was a wine cellar. And often in his novels there are very long discussions about the merits of particular vintages. They talk about in several of his satanic novels about Imperial Tokay, which apparently was this very rare wine that the Tsars had. So there are long discussions about the merits. In fact, in Let Devil Rise Out, there's a wonderful moment where they break into the Duc de Richelieu and Rex van Ryn break into MacArthur's house, and they have this long. They're under great peril, but they still take time to actually have a look at MacArthur's champagne collection. So the novels are actually great fun to read.
Amazing. So you mentioned, is it fair to say that he's now most well known for his satanic books?
Very much so. The others, as I say, it would be interesting if people are looking to sort of study Wheatley. There's a whole body of his work, which, I mean, I haven't read it.
Yes.
But it's interesting that someone who has fallen out of favour, but at one time was so popular, there must be something in them. And I still think, okay, the novels, the satanic novels, are very old-fashioned.
Yes.
Highly imperialistic.
Yes.
There's that casual racism that you get.
Yes.
All foreigners in Wheatley's novels are not to be trusted.
Right,
There's some rather suspect anti-Semitism in some of the novels, and they're quite conservative politically. He's always having a go. For example, in To the Devil a Daughter, it's written in 1953, and he writes about the calumny of the Attlee government and the fact that that rich people living in the south of France, where the novel's actually set, can't take their money out of the UK. So there's a lot of that, and he rails against rationing and Britain under the jackboot of socialism.
Yes, I read that he actually linked communism to Satanism.
Oh, very much. Yeah. Oh, very much so. Into the Devil a Daughter, he blames Rasputin for unleashing the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse that caused the First World War, and he argues that because communism is atheistic, that this is the perfect way for the devil to infiltrate society.
Interesting. So this is interesting because I think this is what we talked about. I think with a lot of this early half of the 20th century, that stories and films that dabble in subjects as shocking as Satanism and occultism usually have to come at it from quite a conservative angle, right? They still have to be on the right side, so to speak, which I guess Dennis Wheatley was.
Yes, very much so. And again, he reminds me a bit of John Buchan. His satanic novels have got lots of chases.
Yes.
They're very fast moving. They're adventure stories.
And we'll get to the films finally in a second, but I think that's really interesting because that very much comes across in one of the films and not so much in the other, which is really interesting. Yeah. Fantastic. All right, well, let's get into it then. Let's talk about The Devil Rides Out from 1968.
Rex, do you believe in evil? As an idea. Do you believe in the power of darkness? As a superstition. Now there you are wrong. The power of darkness is more than just a superstition. It is a living force which can be tapped at any given moment of the night. Why, on one night of 1 year, should these people live in mortal fear?
Graham, first of all, could you just set the scene for us? Tell us a little bit, give us a brief synopsis of the plot.
Well, as I say, it's an adventure story.
Yes.
It's about a group of friends, the Duc de Richelieu, his friend Rex Van Ryn, and their friend Simon Aaron. The Duke and Rex are worried about Simon.
Yes.
He's disappeared. They usually have an annual reunion. Simon, in fact, has fallen amongst a group of Satanists.
Yes.
As you do. And he's in peril of his soul. Simon and another young woman called Tanith are going to be initiated at the Sabbat.
Yes.
They are kidnapped by the Duke and Rex. They meet their nemesis in this figure called Makata, who is a sort of Aleister Crowley figure.
Right, yes.
We may want to talk about Aleister Crowley.
Absolutely,
he figures large. He looms. His bald head looms large in satanic film and fiction.
Absolutely.
It transpires. They manage to rescue Simon at a Sabbath where the Goat of Mendes is called up. It is then a battle between the forces of light and darkness. The Duke and his friends repair to their friends, the Eatons. And the rest of the film is the fact they surround themselves in a circle of protection, whereas the forces of darkness are attempting to draw them out of the circle. Rex, meanwhile, is in a different location with Tanith. Tanith is destroyed.
Yes.
And she then, however, comes back in the form of a spirit. In the meantime, Makata has kidnapped the Eaton's little girl, Peggy, and wants to sacrifice her as a child. Her innocence is much prized by the coven. However, in the end, Tanith comes back as a spirit.
Yes.
and defeats MacArthur. And at the end of the film, Christopher Lee, unusually playing actually the good guy.
Yeah.
Thanks God for their salvation. He also, like Cher, manages to turn back time. He turns back time by invoking this spell from Isis and Osiris.
Yes.
Which manages to turn back time so that MacArthur is killed.
Yes.
Of course, one of the things they also do is summon the horseman of death, and he has to be appeased. So because Tanith has died before, he has to claim another soul, and that soul is MacArthur.
Yes.
So that's a very, very simplified. And as you say, it is full of car chases, mesmerism.
Oh my God, we got everything. Car chases, giant spiders, goats, demonic goat people.
Demonic goats, strange apparitions. Yes, don't look into his eyes, Rex. Strange apparitions.
So much going on. So first of all, what are you a fan of this film? Graham?
Yeah, I think it's one of my favourite occult films. I think it's one of my favourite Hammer films. In fact, I'd put it in certainly my top 10, I think, of all time.
Yes, I think it is my favourite Hammer film that I've seen. Absolutely. It really moves along at a brisk pace, doesn't it? And it's got some great little moments and some great characters, I think. And so how true, to the best of your memory from the book, how true is it to the source material? Is it pretty faithful to Wheatley's novel?
It is, much more than to The Devil a Daughter.
Yes. Well, you can tell that because I think that it seems a bit more experimental cinematically, doesn't it?
And they get a really good script. They get Richard Matheson in to adapt it. There is the only difference really is that in the novel they go over to America to pursue MacArthur because I say Wheatley does like his chases. Yes. That into The Devil a Daughter in the novel, it starts off in the south of France and ends up outside Reading and Wiltshire. So you've got it. So into the Devil. Devil Rides Out. It's pretty faithful.
Yes.
It keeps the main scenes pretty much intact, even down sometimes to dialogue.
And it keeps it local. I like that. I mean, I was rewatching actually Mark Gatiss's Hammer horror documentary when he did the history of horror.
A fine documentary.
So wonderful. And he was talking to, I don't think it was Terence Fisher, it was one of the producers, and they sort of said, they always said to the directors, you can go as far afield as you like as long as it's within walking distance of Bray Studios, basically. And it's like, I could see that they wouldn't want to take the story over to America, necessarily. No. I really liked it. I think it's really good fun. And I do think... I'm surprised that apparently it didn't do as well, like you said, and I guess it's not on brand maybe for them. It's not Dracula and Frankenstein, etc.
But it's one of those films. Again, my little pet theory about television that I was banging on about in the zombie strand.
Yes. That
again, it's had an incredible afterlife on television.
Yes.
It started to get broadcast again in the sort of mid 70s, and that's when I first saw it.
Yeah.
And as I think as a result, its critical reputation has grown.
Yes.
And the fact that it's now out on DVD. So it's one of those films with a very long burn.
I agree. It's really, I think from what I've heard from people on Facebook and everything, that it seems to be a favourite of a lot of people's now, which is that people have really kind of grown to love it. How typical, because we're going to get to this with To the Devil a Daughter especially, I think, but with this movie, how typical a Hammer film is this?
Well, you've mentioned Terence Fisher, and it's one of his last films for Hammer.
Yes.
It's got James Bernard doing the music score, so that discordant...
So loud.
You always have to turn the volume down. Whenever I'm watching a Hammer film, the volume goes up and down.
Agreed. I had to turn it down as well.
Yes. So that's there. Bray is still there. It's recognisable countryside and all of the sort of country house trappings that Hammer have. Even down to things like the film stock.
Yes.
In that particularly vivid,
Yes.
Eastman colour that they use.
That's right.
And of course, it's got Christopher Lee as well.
Yeah.
So I think it's one of the last films that's very recognisably a Hammer film.
Right, that's interesting. Yeah. I think you could show this to anyone, and I'm sure they would recognise it as a Hammer film. I think it's got it's got a lot of the tropes, hasn't it? And Christopher Lee, like we said, I think probably more well known for playing the villains, obviously Dracula, etc. How do you think he does a good job in this one as our hero?
He really takes it seriously.
He does.
And Christopher Lee makes me laugh because he takes things very seriously. That he knew Dennis Wheatley. Mm-hmm. He supposedly went to the British Museum.
Yes.
That spell he evokes at the end, apparently, I don't know if this is true or not, is something that he found in the archives.
Right, oh wow.
And it's a bit like that when he talks about Lord of the Rings and he gets annoyed when people mispronounce Mordor.
Yes.
He takes all this thing very seriously. And he also saw it as a very serious film about dabbling in the occult. So there's, sometimes you do quite. I always love the story about about Christopher Lee falling out with the producers of The Wicker Man when they don't stand when his wife comes into the office. I knew he was a blackguard and he didn't stand for my wife.
Yes, I bet he could have been a right nightmare to work with at times.
But
he like you said, he takes everything very seriously, which really is really wonderful to watch in a performance because he's got a lot of just gravitas. Hasn't he? He's got a lot of presence.
It's not a campy film. Hammer do become campy in their later years, but I think this film works because all of the actors in it take it very seriously.
Great. Yeah, it's so true. Considering some of the quite wacky stuff we see at times, they still take it very seriously.
Yes, I mean there is that. You could argue that there is some high camp in it. When they're at Simon's house and the coven are there, you've got a woman who's boss-eyed. You've got.
I love that.
And interesting, they're all foreigners.
Yes,
you've got someone from China, and of course in the novel you've got it's even worse. There's a man with one arm.
Any kind of minority or outsider in any way. Basically, yes, that's so funny. Yes, I mean, all of that is very. There are absolutely moments of camp in it, but like you say, I think that everyone plays it so well.
Absolutely, and I think the standout performance is Charles Gray.
Right, yes.
We think about it, probably Charles Gray is probably best known as the narrator for the Rocky Horror Picture Show. But he's absolutely mesmerising in To the Devil a Daughter. And him and Lee and the scenes together are absolutely incredible. And also the scene where he comes to visit Mrs. Eaton and he hypnotises her. Yes. Of course, the Duke has probably told you that I am...
The power of the will is something people do not understand, attributing to it mysterious qualities which it does not possess, being merely the power of mind over matter, or in the greater number of cases, the power of mind over mind, as your mind now is succumbing to mine. For as you look into my eyes and listen to my voice, your will is leaving you, slipping away, and you are now beneath my influence.
He's absolutely brilliant, and his eyes, in the scene where he is talking to Tanith in the mirror in the car, and during the car chase.
Oh, I love that. There's some good car sequences in this.
Very much so. It's genuinely exciting.
It is. Yeah, absolutely. And I like the production design. And again, I imagine some of these are probably. I remember you mentioned last time that Hammer did reuse a lot of sets and that kind of thing. But I think it looks great. I love that kind of observatory that has the big pentagram and where they see that kind of apparition of that.
Yes, the sort of let's say it is a spirit from another world, but he is a black man.
Yes, exactly.
Don't look into his eyes, Rex.
I know.
Yes, I mean, we are. There are some slightly dodgy racial politics in Into the Devil Rides Out, but also it's the same in Wheatley's novels. I haven't read Strange Conflict for many years, but I do remember some of the observations about the inhabitants. I can't remember where it's set. I think it's Haiti, about their lives, and there is some pretty dodgy politics going on in Strange Conflict. That only happens really in that one scene, but it's actually an excellent scene.
It is.
It really brings the sense that there is an atmosphere of evil.
Yes.
It's set up by the room becoming cold.
Yeah. No,
and the lights dimming.
Agreed.
Don't look at the eyes, Rex.
Do you think the movie is frightening as a horror film?
I'm not sure. I mean, not in the way The Exorcist is frightening. No. But it does have there are moments, even the where the goat of Mendes appears. Is actually, I'd say it's thrilling more than frightening.
Yes.
Although absolutely. I would set a quiz for the people who listen avidly to Evolution of Horror.
Yes.
I'd like to get people to name their worst ever satanic orgy. Because I think To the Devil a Daughter and Devil Rides Out have some awful orgy scenes.
You're right. Yeah, you're right. Well, again, there's that very kind of British kind of stuffiness. Yes, restraint, isn't there? Exactly. I mean, not that the Wicker Man isn't, but there is this kind of old-fashionedness to these ones.
Yes, I mean, you and me have been to many satanic orgies over the years.
And we know for a fact these aren't.
They're much racier affairs.
Exactly. I love that, and that's the thing. It does feel like a movie that has its cake and eat it in that way. That at the time, I'm sure it's played quite safe for an audience of the time. I guess there's nothing that's going to be too shocking or boundary pushing, even though it is dealing with these, what could be perceived as quite shocking subjects.
Well, Wheatley in the novels, in fact, is more explicit than in the film.
Interesting. Yeah. And actually, because we'll get to this, but there are actually, even now when you look at some of the Hammer DVDs, some of them are sort of 15 maybe, but some of them are PG or 12. They are, I guess, in some ways now quite tame compared to a lot of other horror in terms of explicitness.
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah. Any kind of standout moments for you? Any other highlights within this film? I mean, there are so many great set pieces.
Oh, yeah. I mean, did you say the car chase? I
love the giant spider.
Yes.
That's great.
Yes. And also things like the voice of Peggy, where they are being tempted to move out of the circle.
Yes.
And also the discussions on the occult, which Christopher Lee has with Rex and later with Simon.
Yes.
I think certainly it's a very fast-paced film, and the end is a little bit pat.
The end is for me the only moment that lets it down.
Yes.
Is that let's reverse everything and everything can live happily ever after.
So they come, Rex and Tanith come out of the garden in this beautiful sort of glorious May sunshine, and all is resolved.
Yes. I would have liked a little nasty stinger ending afterwards or something.
Yes.
I'm always quite surprised with Hammerwood that it does suddenly go, okay, everything's over, quickly the credits roll.
And there's usually a fire.
Sudden. Yes.
Hammer solves things usually through a cleansing fire.
Set something on fire and then roll credits, basically.
Yes.
Off you go. Do you think, now you mentioned briefly before, and we've touched upon him already on this series, but Aleister Crowley, I mean, do you think that he was somebody that Wheatley himself was aware of and that was maybe kind of basing some of his characters on, do you think?
Well, not only was he aware of him, he met him. And again, in The Devil Rides Out, McCarter is based on Aleister Crowley.
Right.
And he's probably most well known. His image is on the front of the Sgt. Pepper album.
Yes.
He's bald. He looks a bit like Marlon Brando in Apocalypse Now.
Yes, he does a bit, yeah.
Known as the Beast. In fact, in To the Devil a Daughter, there is a long section where a figure called Conky Bill CB recounts a story that Wheatley himself knew about meeting Crowley in the 30s. By this time, Crowley is an alcoholic. He's on the downward slide, and he puts it down to the fact that back in the sort of, I think, round about just before the First World War, he calls up allegedly a spirit which leads to the death of one of the coven that he's involved in. This takes place in Paris. And then after that, Crowley's powers are taken away. So by that time, he becomes a rather pathetic figure who is sort of begging. He signs one of Wheatley's novels.
Does he? That's really interesting, because I thought maybe would Wheatley have really not would he have hated somebody like Crowley, basically? He
sees him as pathetic, but in the novel and in some of his own autobiographical writings, he believes that Crowley had great power.
Yes.
When he was a member of the Golden Dawn, this late Victorian Edwardian group, people like W.B. Yeats were members of it. So he doesn't poo-poo Crowley. He's rather pathetic. He cuts a rather pathetic figure. He's lost a lot of. Crowley came from a fantastically rich family, but he loses most of his fortune, and he cuts a rather pathetic figure in the 30s.
Right. Yeah.
But at the same time, he as I said, he bases MacArthur on it, who describes in the novel as resembling a white slug and having a lisp. Charles Gray is much more suave in the film. Yeah. But so Crowley looms large in. As I say, he is mentioned into The Devil a Daughter because CB has to pretend to be a Satanist. And he talks to the Father Michael figure, who in the novel is the Canon Copley Sile. This sort of strange priest who actually is conducting experiments on homunculi.
Oh, wow.
So again, the novel is very, very different to the film.
Yes.
But Crowley informs both of those novels, and of course he has a big impact on rock, certainly on satanic. The links between Satanism and rock music.
Well, that seems to be a real thing, right? Doesn't it? I mean, I remember everyone, there weren't a lot of people accusing, Led Zeppelin music and Pink Floyd as having, satanic kind of subliminal messaging in their lyrics and all of that kind of thing.
Well, with Led Zeppelin, I Jimmy Page bought Aleister Crowley's house. Oh, I mean, he had has a serious interest in it. But there was always that myth that if you played Stairway to Heaven backwards. I remember in the 80s there was the Christian right very much had this thing about subliminal messages put encoded onto vinyl, that if you played Stay Away to Heaven at a certain speed, you would hear something like Satan Lord I'm yours.
Oh, I love it.
I never did it. I never.
No. Well, I have done the thing where you play, this is not really related, but you play Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon album at the same time as The Wizard of Oz on mute. Have you heard about this?
I have, yes.
And it kind of syncs up where the music cues and lyrics kind of complement what you see happening on screen, which is very strange. And apparently that's purely coincidental. But if anyone wants to try it, you can do it. You have to press play on the album on the third MGM Lion Roar. It's very specific, and then from that point onwards, everything will sync up in a weird way. Yeah, very strange. There you go. A little tidbit for you there. And do you think, this is something I forgot to ask, but Dennis Wheatley, did he believe in this stuff?
He certainly doesn't discount it.
Yes.
And as mentioned, he put in all of the prefaces, he sounds a warning. That in his experience, those who dabble in the occult, no good will come of it.
Yes.
And one of the things that makes the novel so popular is that he's done his research.
Yeah.
There are long sections where the Duke de Richelieu talks about his experiences about reading these sort of old tracts. And at one point in both the film and the novel, he spends a day in the British Library to sort of equip himself when the coven meets, to gain protection.
Yes.
So Wheatley really had done his research.
That's interesting.
And I think that's one of the things that makes the novel so plausible.
Oh, right, that's interesting. interesting. Yes, because I was going to say, these rituals that we see, and we've seen these kind of things a lot in films about Satanism. I've always wondered how true to, the quote-unquote real satanic rituals that may have happened at this point. How true are they,
Well, I think there is some, I suppose, realism in that the satanic ritual is supposed to be almost a parody of the Catholic Mass.
Oh, yes.
So you've got and Wheatley recounts in the novels in great detail about how they are going to sort of, how the Black Mass is a sort of a reversal.
Yes.
So the music is, they have music, but it's not in the form of hymns. The crucifix will be turned upside down.
Right,
there will be they steal wafers from churches in order to sort of give a sort of parodic version of the sacrament.
So it's like they're mocking Christianity.
It's a mock, yes.
Yes.
And instead of wine, there is blood.
Yes, yes. Interesting. So, as you said, the movie didn't necessarily have a big impact, but it's been a kind of slow burner, The Devil Rides Out.
I think so, in terms
do you think for that reason, has it had an influence on films, on horror, and on Satanism in movies that we've seen since, or because it was kind of under the radar? I don't know. Do you think that's the case?
I personally don't think it has. Because, again, if we're thinking about evolution, I think this is where one species ends.
Yes, agreed.
And then we've got Rosemary's Baby.
Yes.
And again, a bit like Night of the Living Dead for the zombie film, it's paradigm shifting.
Yes,
it
you're right.
Completely changes what we understand as sort of satanic or the occult.
Yeah, fascinating, isn't it? Really, how 1968 really is this kind of line in the sand
for almost everything.
For everything. Yeah, really interesting. Wonderful. So finally, then. It's 52 years old now. How do you think it holds up? Do you think this movie, has dated? I mean, in some ways, all of Hammer films kind of are of a time, aren't they? But how do you think it holds up?
I think it really holds up well.
Yeah.
The same way that Night of the Demon does.
Yes.
I watched both of them recently. I'm still gripped by them.
The one thing that divides people with Night of the Demon is, what do you think of the demon itself? Do you think it was better off not being shown?
I actually like it.
Yeah.
I actually think it works.
Yes.
I don't think it's silly.
It works to me to a point. I think when you see it from far away in the smoke, I think it's genuinely frightening. And then there is a moment when you see it sort of pick up the person, and then I kind of lose it slightly.
It's a bit like that with King Kong.
Yes.
It always works until they do the close-up of the face.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I think it does hold up, definitely, because I think it's, like you said, it's good performances, good characters, good conversations.
Yes.
What I do quite like about Hammer is that there's a lot of just characters talking in drawing rooms and that kind of stuff.
There's a lot of that.
And that kind of stuff doesn't age, really, does it?
No.
That's the thing.
And again, Christopher Lee, even when he's making a film like Gremlins 2, he's still good in it.
He takes his craft very seriously.
Very seriously.
Yes, it's wonderful. All right, fantastic. Well, let's move on then to the next movie, because that's so different in so many ways. So let's get on to the Devil a Daughter. This is from 1976.
The evil power of black magic has fascinated millions of moviegoers. In 1967, Rosemary's Baby. In 1974, The Exorcist. And now, a motion picture that probes further into the mysteries of the occult that any has dared before.
98% of so-called Satanists are nothing but pathetic freaks who get their kicks out of dancing naked in freezing churchyards. I have a feeling I'm dealing with that other 2%.
Richard Widmark challenges Christopher Lee for the soul of a girl named Catherine in the terrifying film of Dennis Wheatley's sensational bestseller, To the Devil, a Daughter.
So, Graham, we've got another Dennis Wheatley story here. Tell me, what's the story of To the Devil a Daughter?
Well, again, it's well, in the novel, the novel is completely different. Well, I think we'll look at it in terms of what the film, and if I can actually because I'm even not sure what the film is trying to do. Yeah. But I've watched the film many times.
Okay. Well, you're going to know better than me.
And I read the novel recently on holiday, so I'm hopefully coming fresh to the fight.
Yes.
But I would warn anyone watching To the Devil a Daughter. It's hard going in order to understand what's going on.
Yes, agreed.
So it begins with a young nun Christina, who has moved over from Germany. Her father, for some reason, has put her in a convent at a very early age, and she's looked after by Father Michael. The beginning of the film, Father Michael is being defrocked for something that he believes, and he says, "I will not recant." So Christina moves over to England. She's however, she is met for some strange reason, by an author, Richard Verney. I think it's Richard Verney.
John Verney.
John Verney,
yes.
Who has been approached by her father, Henry Beddoes, played by Denham Elliott. And again, this is one of the many mysteries in the film, that he has no relationship with Henry Beddoes.
Why on earth does he approach this man and ask him?
And will you look after my daughter? We think it's because of money. Honor Blackman, who plays his literary agent, John Verney is an author on the occult. They look after Christina. Verney, we find out, has actually sold Christina to the devil. He's made a pact. He has this talisman, this amulet, in which, for worldly success, he has Christina's soul. Verney, assisted by his friend, played by Anthony Valentine, try to persuade Beddoes that if they can get the talisman and allow him to recant, he will free Christina. Meanwhile, back in Germany, a woman for no reason at all called Anna is pregnant. She gives birth to this strange creature in a rather horrible scene in which her legs are tied and she almost has to actually have the birth through her stomach.
Like an alien.
In a horror which sort of prefigures the chest burst in the Alien by a good couple of years. This creature is put into an incubator. And then Christina is then kidnapped by Father Michael's henchman, and this creature becomes almost a sort of a receptacle. It crawls back into her inside her. Now there is I still don't understand what's going on in the film. In the novel, it's much clearer. That the Father Michael figure, Canon Copley Sile, is breeding this group of homunculi in glass jars. And he wants Christina, because she's a virgin, and that the stars are in conjunction for her 21st birthday, that her blood, these homunculi, grow on blood. And that by this conjunction, they will be able to live independently outside of their glass jars. Now, I think that's what's going on in the film.
It's not made very clear.
It's not made very clear at all. That this creature will live through the sacrifice of Christina. Her blood will somehow give it life. To the devil, a daughter.
Right.
Now, the listeners on Evolution of Horror might have their own interpretation, because it's very unclear.
It's out there, isn't it? I mean, it's really interesting. This was the first time I'd seen this, and I think if you watch The Devil Rides Out and you think, great, another Hammer movie that is also Dennis Wheatley, that is also Christopher Lee, you're going to be
what could go wrong?
Yeah, you're going to be very surprised. It's so different, isn't it? I would almost never, like we talked about, there's something that was so classic Hammer about The Devil Rides Out. This doesn't feel like a Hammer film to me. There's something about it. It's all very modern 70s London, lots of kind of shooting on location out and about. There's no music, or there is the kind of sort of strange minimalist music. It almost feels kind of experimental or art house, this film, doesn't it?
I mean I don't think it was meant to be art house, but it was made in great confusion. So it was adapted by Chris Wicking, who had written another obscure Hammer film called Demons of the Mind. And it went through lots of different script changes. In fact, I think the writer for The Duelists had worked on it as well. Accounts on the DVD extra, there's a little documentary on it, and they talk about the script still being written 10 days into production. So it's all over the place.
That makes sense, yes.
Wheatley himself disowned the film. He died a year after it was made, and vowed never to let Hammer make another film of his. I mean, we also ought to perhaps say that this was Hammer's last film.
Yes, this marks the end of Hammer.
This marks the end of Hammer. I mean, by this time, really, they're on the bones of their arse.
Yes.
They have a big budget for this film, but you wouldn't think so.
No.
I mean, it's odd that they have location shooting. I mean, the first scenes take place in Germany.
Yeah.
And another thing I would say to anyone watching this film, have patience with it, because it takes about 20 minutes to get going. There are people going. It takes, we see Christina at a German airport, then we see her at Heathrow, we see her going in a boat.
Yeah.
So the scenes filmed in Germany don't seem to have any sense to it at all.
Not at all. It's very strange. I was thinking, is it trying to be in some way art house? The other thing I thought is, is it trying to? It's interesting. We talked about obviously The Devil Rides Out right at the end of this kind of wave and the beginning of a new wave, and what we've got now is a Hammer film that's coming out post The Omen, The Exorcist, Rosemary's Baby. And in some ways there were bits that reminded me of, or at least it felt like it was trying to jump on those kind of styles. And
it was, and missing.
Yes.
Very much. I mean, again, they'd missed, they had missed the boat, really. I mean, Exorcist, was it 73?
Yeah.
Omen, 75?
I think it was that year, actually, 76. So they may not have seen The Omen at this point. But
also films like Devil's Reign. There are a lot of satanic films that are coming out in 76. Devil's Reign, The Sentinel. But this film is so muddled.
Yes.
I mean, it has its moments, and it does certainly have its fans. I'm perhaps being unduly negative about To the Devil's a Daughter, because it definitely has bloggers, advocates, people who write scholarly work on Hammer and horror films who have a lot of love for this film.
Well, that's interesting.
So I may be perhaps being unfair about it.
I think I wasn't a big fan either, actually, but I think it is. I find it a frustrating watch because I want to get to grips with what's happening, and I kind of you want it. I found myself missing the old Hammer style. That's the thing. It felt unnecessarily convoluted in comparison.
I think if they'd been more faithful to Wheatley's novel, it's set in the south of France, and it's of its time. But the plot with the homunculi is absolutely brilliant.
Yes.
And when I was reading it over the summer, I was thinking, well, this would be really exciting.
Yes. Yes.
But instead, they borrow from that idea, but it never quite gels. I mean, there are some silly scenes where you see where Christina sees the baby in the mirror.
Yes, although it's very creepy when the baby crawls inside Christine. That's a frightening moment, which I quite enjoy.
It's a very gory film.
It's a very gory film. Yes.
Yes,
and it's actually. I think the problem is with it is it's not a whole lot of fun. Even the horror is quite nasty in a way that you don't expect from Hammer. Like we talked about The Devil Rides Out. Even though the actors are taking it seriously, there are moments of fun campiness to it. This has no fun or campiness to it.
No, only unwittingly. There is a wonderful moment where Honor Blackman, Pussy Galore in Goldfinger, is attempting to seduce her boyfriend. Well, not seduce. They're actually in the bedroom. And, they're playing Mastermind. Do you remember the game from the 70s with the little pegs?
Do you know what? I have a set. I bought one recently. I know. So there you go.
But it's not something for the bedroom, is it? It's not something an amorous evening would not begin with Mastermind.
I mean, we wouldn't bring one to one of our satanic orgies, Graham. I think that's the thing.
Travel Scrabble. It gets off to all sorts of debauchery, but not Mastermind.
No, that's very funny. I mean, I do think Honor Blackman's Christopher Lee is good as well. I think he does a good job being back here as the kind of nasty, scary villain again. But I really didn't like Richard Widmark as John Vernon.
Richard Widmark really looks as though he does not want to be there.
Doesn't care, does he? No, it's very strange.
He looks exhausted. I mean, I was looking on Wikipedia recently, and he died quite relatively recently in his 95.
Wow.
But he looks absolutely burnt out
He
in
looks
this
really
film.
old. Yeah, that's
he's even
amazing.
got an old man's hat,
Yes.
hasn't he? And he looks old.
Yes. And I think
completely miscast.
and I think that doesn't help. I think, it's weird anyway as to why this guy is our main hero
Yes.
and why this woman has been sent to him. But also the fact that he doesn't really have any kind of magnetism or charisma or likability. So it just makes the whole thing even weirder, doesn't it?
Yeah, he's walking through this film.
Yes.
But it has, Denham Elliott is always good
Yes.
in films. And he plays that sort of, that haunted, a man who when Widmark finds him, he's holed up in his house inside a protective pentagram.
Yes.
And that's a really good scene.
It's great, and he does a very good job from the start, from that moment when he runs into that whatever it is exhibition or something to kind of to talk to Verney and everything.
Yes. Doesn't know him.
No,
doesn't know him at all.
Absolutely amazing. The other thing that I found very confusing, at least in the first third of this movie, we talked about how when you watch The Devil Rides Out, you might want to turn the volume down. I was turning it up with this, and again, I didn't know if this was a technical problem or if it was an artistic choice. But sometimes the dialogue is muted.
Yes.
Sometimes the music isn't there, and it just goes silent. The moments set outside kind of seem muted and weird. It's very strange.
Yeah. When they're at Heathrow Airport, you can't hear what they're saying. the announcements.
Yeah.
Well, there's some great pleasures of seeing someone smoking a pipe.
Oh yeah.
In Heathrow, in the golden days when you could still smoke in airports.
Yes, and so it seems as well that they've completely come away from their sort of Bray Studios land at this point.
Very much so, but I don't think it to any great success.
No.
I mean, they've done it in previous films, like The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires.
Yes, they started to do this in the 70s, right?
Yes. But Hammer's better when it is contained into that claustrophobic world of the Bray Studios.
Do you think it suits being period set as well, as opposed to contemporary?
Well, I don't, because it works so well in The Exorcist and in Rosemary's Baby.
Yes.
So it should work here, but it really doesn't. And it doesn't help actually having Natasha Kinski as a nun.
Yes.
So she doesn't really... I mean, also it's difficult that... the other thing as well, it was difficult to understand what she was saying.
Yes,
she either was dubbed or her English at that point was not very good. I mean, we later see her in Tess and Paris, Texas, and her English is very, very good.
Yeah, agreed.
I mean, she even does a Dorset accent in Tess.
She does. Yeah, that's very true. I didn't know she was dubbed as well. And it's very strange, again, she's 14 years old in this, and there is a moment with a full frontal nudity of a 14-year-old actress. That's very strange. I mean, I can't believe even in 1976 that was legal, to be honest. I'm quite shocked by that.
Yeah, I don't know whether they knew.
No.
I don't know whether they knew. But I mean, there was this trend of that in Blood on Satan's Claw. Linda Hayden, I think, was 15.
Was she? I wasn't
15
sure.
15 or 16 when she does that.
Maybe, yeah. And again, actually,
completely gratuitous as well.
Yes.
There is no reason.
No, you're right.
He just says, are you tempted by Christine? So then she's
meant to be this. Is it... I wasn't quite clear at this point, but was that a fake? That was like a kind of a vision.
Yes, a vision put before him.
Yes.
Whereas I can understand it in Blood on Satan's Claw, because she's there to tempt.
Yes.
She's there to tempt the priest.
That's right.
Here it does seem sort of gratuitous. It's not really needed, and there's a lot of that in Hammer.
Agreed. And also
in the 70s,
especially in the latter half. I mean, interestingly, I was reading an interesting article that compared Hammer with the Carry On franchise. I think that's really funny. And we talked about this briefly last
they
time, didn't we?
produced some of their films.
Well, it's great as well with Carry On Screaming. There's a perfect crossover there. But what's really interesting is that they kind of have the same trajectory, don't they? Where they kind of start off quite quaint. They kind of hit their peak in the mid-60s. And then they kind of struggle to keep up with how things are changing. And they get a bit more smutty and not as good in the 70s.
Precisely. Well, the To the Devil a Daughter's equivalent in Carry On is Carry On Emmanuel.
Exactly. That's what I was
which
just
is
about to
almost
say.
Unwatchable.
Agreed.
Almost unwatchable. It's awful.
Yeah.
Seeing Kenneth Williams cavorting on a bed with Suzanne Danielle is not a pretty sight.
It's not. And you just think everyone is hating being there and doing that film.
Oh, it's awful. And Carry On England is really poor.
And it is literally the same kind of time. I think it was about 76, 77 when these movies were coming out.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting, isn't it? It's this idea of these kind of quaint British traditions just absolutely just burning out.
There's a sense of exhaustion in British cinema in the sort sort of late 70s.
Yeah, it's really, I find all of that fascinating about it. And I think, despite the fact that neither of us particularly maybe are huge fans of the film, I think it's an interesting time capsule, isn't it? And it's interesting to look at this alongside The Devil Rides Out and just look at how Hammer changed in that 8-year period.
Yeah, and then you see what's going on in the States, where the satanic film is going through all sorts of fascinating changes and subgenres.
Yeah, and as we've talked about before, when it comes to British horror, it's much more interesting from 68 onwards when you look more at the folk horror end of things and you look at Blood on Satan's Claw and Witchfinder General and The Wicker Man, and much more interesting and doing new and exciting things compared to Hammer, unfortunately.
Yeah, Tygon and certainly Tygon, I think, and Amicus are doing much more innovative.
Yes,
even Pete Walker.
Yes,
is I shouldn't even say even Pete Walker, because Pete Walker has sort of had a bit of a renaissance. In recent years.
Yeah. So I mean, it is interesting. Again, we talked about The Devil Rides Out. It kind of is aged very well. What about this one? I mean, would you still recommend this, or is this just for completists? Would you say completionists?
Well, there is that chap, isn't there, on the evolution of horror who's recorded every mention of a film.
Yes, that's right. Yes, he has. Yes, Tom Cushing, his name is.
Yes,
and he has
I applaud that man.
Amazing,
I really do.
Absolutely amazing. He's been creating a list on Letterboxd, which is where you can log films of every single film mentioned from episode 1 of this podcast, and he's already up to something like 500. Amazing. But
I would. Yeah, I mean, is it for completists? Well, perhaps it's a little bit better than that.
Yes.
I think it's worth watching, but it's not a great film.
No.
And I would. It's worth watching, as I say, The Omen, The Exorcist, and then watch this and just see. It's a coda in a way.
It is a coda,
because then we've got all sorts of interesting things happening in the 1980s.
Absolutely,
where the satanic film
starts to change
again.
Yeah, agreed. It's a very interesting piece of history. And Christopher Lee as well. I mean, I wonder whether he seems to be doing a good job. He seems to be taking it seriously.
He does.
But I wonder whether even he must have been pretty over it by now, was he? The whole Hammer scene.
I think he really wished Hammer well.
Yes.
And he believed in he said himself that he felt the film the script was really good until the ending.
Right.
Because it ends again with Verney throwing a rock at Christopher Lee, and then he disappears.
Yeah.
we have, again,
makes no sense.
The ending is absolutely it's absolutely bonkers.
Yeah, it is bonkers. I enjoyed from a historical point of view seeing what London looked like in the 1970s.
Yes.
There's a lot of running across bridges and docks and Catherine's docks and all of that kind of thing.
Waiting for a bridge to go up.
Yes. Very weird.
Yes.
Heathrow Airport back then and all of that kind of thing. That was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I always think in horror films or any films where you see London or a particular city or New York or Washington in The Exorcist.
Yes, exactly.
I always enjoy watching films for cities.
Yes.
To see what that city looks like at the time.
Because that's one thing you don't get with a lot of early Hammer, do you? Because it's very much kind of you're in Gothic castles and manor houses and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so. And in fact, other British horror films in the 70s make London much more central. One of my favourite films, Deathline.
Oh yes,
really features London.
Yes,
in all of its glorious seediness, including this incredible rundown pub.
Oh yeah. Well, I love that. I did a little pilgrimage, a little tour around London of the areas in Peeping Tom, where they filmed and actually worked in Fitzrovia in London, right next to the alley, which is where the sex worker in the opening scene of Peeping Tom is killed.
Hello, dearie.
Hello, dearie. £5. Classic. I do. I love all of that about it. I love seeing old London.
Yeah.
And, it's great from that perspective, I think. And I thought this film was interesting from that perspective. But in terms of the story, that was a puzzler.
It's a very, very confused script. It's a bit like They Saved Hitler's Brain. If you've ever seen that film, it's completely mangled narrative. You have no idea what's going on.
So obviously these two, they are interesting to talk about as a pair, but I just wondered, outside of these two, in terms of occult movies or witchy movies or whatever within Hammer, are there any others that you would recommend? As somebody who's seen more Hammer than I have, anything else that you...
Well, there is, I think, one of the most interesting, and it's a very early film by Hammer on the occult, is The Witches.
Oh, yeah.
Fetish men. Black witchcraft as real as an African nightmare. Academy Award-winning Joan Fontaine, star of some of the screen's most memorable motion pictures, slants a new angle on the story of the witches, the devil's own disciples.
Now, I think this is incredibly underrated as a film.
It's wonderful. So I watched this for the first time this week because I thought, this might get brought up. And I actually almost thought, should we have talked about this instead of To the Devil a Daughter? I loved it. I thought it was brilliant. Yeah,
I think if you were going to sort of choose between... I wouldn't want you to choose between the two, but
No.
The Witches is a much earlier film.
Yes.
Well, it's sort of 66.
Yeah.
With Joan Fontaine, again, using another American.
Yeah.
And it's a bit like... If you like The Wicker Man, you will love The Witches.
It's folk horror, isn't it? It's much more folk horror in some ways. And it reminds me a bit of Blood on Satan's Claw. Again, it almost felt like a bit of a prototype of
Very much so, with children knowing too much.
Yes. These kind of corruption of the innocent children in a village and that kind of thing.
Yes, the boy is taken away because in case he will take the young girl Linda's virginity.
Yes.
And again, they're all in on it. Again, there's a priest who's not a priest,
Yes.
who pretends to be a priest, but in actual fact, he's a
I
Satanist.
just like wearing the collar.
Yes, I like wearing the collar. There's no harm in it.
It's brilliant. And actually, that is one that is set in the modern day at the time, isn't it?
Although it starts in Africa.
Yes.
She's had a nervous break. Joan Fontaine is a teacher. I suppose we ought to explain she's a teacher. She's menaced by witch doctors. There's an uncredited Rudolph Walker at the beginning,
who I recognised instantly.
Yes, uncredited in the film.
Yes.
Interestingly, and she's harassed by. She's a Christian. She's in a Christian mission at this school, and she has a nervous breakdown. And it all goes a bit turn of the screw because you don't quite know. She comes to this little quiet, seemingly peaceful village to run this school, run by the benign Reverend, I think Baxter or something. I think he's Reverend Baxter. And you're never quite sure whether she's going mad or whether suddenly strange, and it's small things start to happen.
It's insidious. It's slow, isn't it? I thought it was wonderful. I loved the woman who is the Reverend's sister, who is she's a journalist, isn't she? And we won't say too much.
She ain't what she seems.
She may not be what she seems. Exactly. But it made me laugh at the beginning. Which opens because obviously this was the same year as Plague of the Zombies, wasn't it? And it opens with banging of voodoo drums. I was like, oh, here we go.
They borrow. Well, we've got these drums. We've got these headdresses. We've got the extras from Plague of the Zombies. We've got to do something with them.
It was so funny, and that kind of reveal of this kind of big scary African mask. I thought that's one of the least scary things in the whole in the film, actually. But
and it's the way it plays very subtly, in the same way that The Wicker Man does. On psychological doubt.
Yes.
How much of this? This is why Henry James's novella is such The Turn of the Screw is such a brilliant novella.
Yeah.
How much is this part of her? How much is this part of mental illness? Or actually, how much? Of course, we learn in the end it isn't. She's not mad. She's not mad at all.
No, and again, you could liken it to Rosemary's Baby as well. This idea of, is this woman mad, or is this a conspiracy against her as well? And I love those types of movies. It's quite low key. I was reading in the DVD booklet that somebody had written about it that it was given an A certificate, and actually Hammer were trying to rally against that and to get something higher, but there isn't a whole lot of explicit horror in it, is it? But it's very psychological.
But it's a much more disturbing film.
It's more frightening than the other ones we've talked about.
And particularly about that whole, and that's why I think Rosemary's Baby is such a great film, and the novel actually, Ira Levin's novel. I've not read it, but I heard Kim Cattrall on BBC Radio.
That's right. Yes,
she's a fantastic narrator for it.
She's got a great voice. Yeah, no, and I love going back to the original definition of the word occult, I think in some ways, some of my favourites are these ones like Rosemary's Baby and The Witches, where everything is happening hidden. Everything is going on the other side of a wall, and we don't quite know if it's happening or not. Yes. I love that. Yes. You know, it tends to sometimes lose its ability to scare me when you suddenly do see pentagrams and people in robes and sacrificing goats and things, because then it does go into campy territory.
Well, it's when Rosemary hears them upstairs. That's just very odd, muffled noises. And the fact that I can't remember his name for the couple. He's got an earring.
Yes. I know.
He's got a pierced ear.
Yes.
And it's things like
little
that
things.
That
and it's the husband, the way the husband will go and see them, and then suddenly things start picking up in his career, and it's so
hates them at the first, why do we have to go and have this meal, that awful meal with the
and then the two men have a chat. It's so scary. It still is. It's a really frightening movie, and again, especially these days, thinking of it in that kind of post Me Too way, and this kind of what people call now gaslighting, and this idea of making a woman feel like she's losing her mind when actually it's all orchestrated and that kind of thing. It's a very frightening thing. But all of that is present in The Witches, which I really liked.
I think it's a film that really deserves. I mean, treat yourself to the Hammer box set. I would say. There are other collections, but the one I'm thinking about is the
big
one
black
with black box. That's the best one I've come across. Well, the only one I've actually got.
It's very good. I've got it as well, and I'm really glad that I thought I'll give The Witches a watch before we chat. I'm glad you did. Yes. And I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Wonderful, Graham. Thank you so much once again for joining me. My last question to you is: what is your favourite occult horror movie?
Well, I suppose we mentioned them. I think it's Night of the Demon and Rosemary's Baby. But I think out of the two, Night of the Demon never fails. If it's on, I'll watch it. It's often on the horror channel in the UK.
Yes, it is. It's on a lot, isn't it? They're great. Actually, those two are great little snapshots of the difference, I think, between American cinema and British as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
They pretty much nail it.
Yes, out country houses
and then
metropolitan New York.
Metropolitan. Yeah, fascinating. Brilliant. Well, Graham, thank you very much. If anyone out there wants to come and find you, you're not on Twitter, are you?
No,
but
I'm
they might
not.
find you.
Not, no.
They might find you. They might find stuff you've written out there. In the world.
If you want to find me, if you want to write that PhD on Dennis Wheatley, I'm at the University of Birmingham, and you can find me on the website in the drama department. So it's Graham Saunders, and I'm emailable.
And you're on the group. You're on the Evolution of Horror.
I'm on FacePaint.
Yes.
I'm on FacePaint.
Brilliant, Graham. Thank you very much. And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and a big thank you to my brilliant guest, Graham Saunders. So great to have him back on the podcast. So let me know what you thought of this week's episode. I mean, I know there are a lot of Hammer fans out there among you guys. Maybe we were being a bit harsh on To the Devil a Daughter. Do you want to stick up for that movie? Please do get in touch. I'd love to hear your thoughts. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Twitter. And don't forget, you can also follow us on Letterboxd, and that's where you can keep up to date with what movies we're going to be covering in this occult series, so you can watch the films in advance. If you want to support this podcast, you can sign up to our Patreon page. If you donate just $5 per month, that's about £3.80, you will get access to every single bonus episode we've done. There's about 50 or 60 episodes now, and this week we're going to be bringing you a very exciting one. As it's Friday the 13th, I'm doing a special Evolution of Horror Journey Through Sci-Fi crossover. If you're not listening to the Journey Through Sci-Fi podcast, you should be. It's a very similar podcast structure to this one, except they cover sci-fi. Anyway, we all got together to discuss the Friday the 13th classic, Jason X. So please do get involved and check out that crossover event of the year. Just go to patreon.com/evolution of horror. You can find all episodes of this podcast on our website. Simply go to evolutionofhorror.com. If you want to write articles, reviews, essays, blogs, whatever you like for the website, you can. Just drop me an email with any ideas over to evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can find this podcast on all major podcast platforms, including iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher, Acast, Libsyn, and Spotify. Please do subscribe to us. Please do tell your friends and family about us, tweet about us, post about us, share the word, share the love. And if you get a chance, please do drop us a little rating or review, especially if you use Apple Podcasts. It really helps us get boosted in charts and algorithms and that kind of thing, which helps us get discovered by new listeners. Okay, on to next week then. Well, we're going to stay in the UK and we're going to move forward into the early 1970s and talk about what I think remains to this day one of the most shocking and controversial, infamous movies ever made. This movie is still not available in its entire uncut glory, which is a tragedy. Next week, I'm going to be joined by the final girls, Anna Bugutskaya, and we are going to be discussing Ken Russell's The Devils from 1971. Holy shit, where do we start? Cannot wait. Join us next week for all of this and more on the evolution of horror.